Good evening. Welcome to Planning and Zoning Commission meeting for December 7th, 2023. And at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Commissioners who are present for this evening's meeting are at City Hall. We also have staff from the city attorney and clerk's offices, as well as city planning department. I don't believe we have anybody joining us on Zoom. Oh, we do. If you're joining us on Zoom, let me see. You can see that you're here. You may observe the meeting. However, your ability to be seen on screen and talk will be muted. During the public testimony portion of the meeting, you will be unmuted and then be able to comment. Please note that we cannot take questions until the public testimony portion. If you have a process question during the meeting, please email cityclerk@meridiancity.org and they will reply as quickly as possible. With that, we will begin with roll call. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Commissioner Seal. Let's start with Commissioner Grace.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Wheeler.
Here.
Commissioner Rivera.
Here.
Chairperson Seal.
Here. First item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. I do need confirmation on which of our applications will be continued, because I know there was a little chatter about that. Kurt, you want to take that or?
Mr. Chairman, of course, that's the commission's decision, but my understanding, we have a request from the applicant for agenda item 4 as well as agenda item 5 to continue those two items. The first dealing with Bladen subdivision, the second pertaining to Farmstone Crossing subdivision.
Okay. So generally, the first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda, where we will announce, and unless there's anybody that really wants to hear either of the applications tonight, that Bladen subdivision H 2023-0043 and Farmstone Crossing subdivision H 2023-0045 will be open for the sole purpose of continuing to a regularly scheduled meeting. They'll be open for that purpose alone. So if anybody is here tonight to testify for the applications, we'll be not be taking public testimony on them this evening. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adopt the agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, and we have 3 items on the consent agenda. The first is to approve the minutes of the November 16th, 2023 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. And we also have findings of facts and conclusions of law, conclusion of law for the Meridian OZ, file number H 2023-0048. And Chick-fil-A at 10 Mile, file number H 2023-0054. Can I get a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved, Mr. Chair. Second.
Been moved and seconded to, excuse me, adopt the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. All right. Public hearing process. I'm going to be abbreviated version of this. So essentially, we've got one application that we're going to go through the whole thing on here. The others will be continued. So we've got essentially the city staff is going to be giving their presentation later. So we'll go by the public hearing process. So at this time, I would like to open file number H 2023-0043 Bladen subdivision for a continuation to the date of February 15th, 2024.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, and one item is they will need to repost this because it is far enough out, and they'll need to pay for that reposting. So if you're going to make a motion, please have that in there.
Right. Try to do that if anyone wants to correct me. Mr. Chair, I move to continue file number H-2023-0043 to the hearing date of February 15th, 2024 at the applicant's request. Also with the requirement that the applicant repost and pay the costs as needed, or repost the notice and pay all the costs.
A second? Okay. It's been moved and seconded to continue file number H 2023-0043 for Bladen subdivision to the date of February 15th, 2024. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Item is continued. Next, I'd like to open file number or continue file number H 2023-0045 for Farmstone Crossing subdivision for a continuation to January 4th, 2024.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we continue file number H 2023-0045 to our next scheduled meeting on January 4th, 2024.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to continue file number H 2023-0045 to the date of January 4th, 2024. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion or the application is continued. Now we'll open file number H 2023-0057, 2023 Mixed Use Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment, Mixed Use. We will begin with our staff report.
Commissioner Seal, thanks for having me here tonight. I look forward to spending the next 3 hours with you.
There's a lot of information in here.
Yeah. I'm here to talk with you about some updates to the comprehensive plan, chiefly to the mixed use areas of Chapter 3, Evolving Community. Hopefully this sounds familiar to some of you as we talked about it during the August comprehensive plan policy update. Briefly, this is an overview of the presentation. We'll cover some background, purpose and need, process, what's been done, overview, recommended changes, and then recommendation. The city adopted the 2019 comprehensive plan in 2019, and which included all the goals, objectives, and policies. Each year since, we've adopted an amendment. The first was in 2020 to add priorities to the policies. They weren't originally prioritized. The second in 2021 to adopt the field sub-area plan. The third in 2022 to adopt the most current existing conditions report. And then the fourth was earlier this year with you all to amend the priorities, since we hadn't done it for a number of years. In summary, we've not done any text amendments to areas outside of policies to the comprehensive plan. This will be the first one. There's, and I will dwell here for a little bit. There's a number of reasons for this comprehensive plan text amendment or CPAT. Most importantly, the comprehensive plan and future land use map are designed with a healthy balance of uses in mind. In the case of residential, it's intended that these areas are near services. By design, mixed use areas are the only areas for many of those services to occur in areas of our city impact. You can sort of see that on the screen here. Northwest Meridian doesn't have any distinct commercial or office uses, and most of South Meridian doesn't have any distinct office or commercial uses. All those uses we would expect within those areas are intended to occur in the mixed use areas. Increasingly, however, the land where many of these mixed use areas are located have been acquired with the intention of maximizing certain uses in certain market conditions and without any concern or reservation for future needs or impacts to the city long-term. This comprehensive plan text amendment seeks to better clarify these expectations. It also seeks to make the formatting and presentation of all relevant information and considerations more streamlined. A great deal of risk is involved with many applications in these areas currently. Review of development applications in mixed use areas is usually very protracted with many revisions of concept plans, trying to get staff and applicants on the same page, even when that's what the applicant wants to do. So it's not necessarily that they don't want to, it's just that the current comprehensive plan is really difficult to wrap your head around for some users. Expectations aren't clear. Finally, we want to be more transparent with everyone. Consistency is important. Staff have been working on these revisions for 7 months. Initial rough drafts were based on years of experience with this new plan, new being relative, and seeking to address common flaws or problems. After a coherent draft was assembled, along with some new exhibits, a group of experienced professionals and agency partners were asked to review and provide comments. Significant changes, and I mean that, were made, including reordering sections. Some of the best feedback, however, were building consistency between some of the terminology we used and better conveying the process and how things occur in what order. Next, internal staff did a review with minor revisions. And finally, we invited development partners and entities prior to submitting our application to comment. The city clerk's office also customized some social media messaging, which included links to a new dedicated website. We did not, unfortunately, have any additional participation through the website, but it was there. I should say we did have comments, just not through the website. The restructure is more top-down or linear. I say restructure because while there's a lot new, there's also a lot old. This amendment adheres to the vision and keeps much of what previously exists, but often reorders or supplements it. There's a stronger intro and lead-in, more context for need, graphic illustrations that identify the process with structure, and that structure aligns with the text of the comprehensive plan in the mixed use section. So the text as you read it aligns with basically a flow chart we have now. It also reduces duplication of principles, provides more consistent metrics, and applies all these metrics to the 10-mile plan, which has its own sub-area plan, but now we have sort of unifying principles citywide, or hopefully we will. Just to emphasize the metrics, this work was all done with scenario modeling using real non-residential service uses and considering gross residential areas. In other words, can we get what residents need after the rooftops have filled in? So we typically see any number of applications that have a whole lot of residential, and then we often don't leave enough areas for these services that we need to come in later on. And so work was identified with these metrics to make sure that some of the new caps and minimums both actually realize what we're looking for long-term. In other words, the coverage areas for residential, making sure those leave enough coverage areas for commercial, those ceilings and those floors for those coverage areas align. And that's probably more visual. I should have had a thing in there, but each of the designations in the mixed use, so mixed use neighborhood, mixed use community, mixed use regional, they each have consistent terminology that describes minimum residential area, maximum residential area, and then any number of other policies that relate, for example, civic uses or bonuses or retail. But those are all provided in the same location for each designation. They're provided with the same terminology for each designation, and they're more consistent. We had all those things before, but they were very inconsistent. They were worded in such a way as to like it was a formula, but you were only given parts and pieces of that, and you can actually make the math work. So now the math works. And finally, most bonuses that were associated with these metrics before have been retooled to focus on employment and on transportation, not necessarily sort of what was arbitrary civic uses. Spent too much time on that for that one. What's been done? The new appendix includes enhancements to the existing mixed-use diagrams with additional annotation. There's more examples, organization, better organization, and then in the web version of the comprehensive plan, which is we have to have a PDF for record, but the web tool is our sort of default one. And the web version of the if this is approved, when it's approved, there'll be links and pop-ups that make all this sort of seamless. This is an overview of the new structure. Much of the general overview was unorganized before, and there's also new sub-areas of this. So the value mixed use, the location, and generalized land use types. This describes where they're at, why they're there, and why they're important. Before, this was sort of, some of this was there, but it was really sort of all over the place. Functional integration is a new subheading with integration of uses in holistic design subsections being a compilation of design principles or guidelines, both from the existing text and new supplemental ones. Those have also been organized better. Essentially, integration equates to what's being included, and holistic design is how it should be organized. All of that prefaces the mixed use subcategories now, again, so mixed use neighborhood, mixed use community, mixed use regional chiefly. You see the design sort of elements before you get into all those, at least the ones that apply to all of them. I will say, many of those elements are where we struggle the most now. So a lot of people see these bullet points and treat them like checkboxes. And they forget that these checkboxes relate to a purpose, vision, and context. And you can't just check a box without understanding what those things are. So that's all, we've attempted to sort of better relate all of those things. This slide here essentially directs interested parties to use the entire mixed use area. This is what I've been talking about, but hopefully it makes more sense. It's linear. So the first three boxes in the middle there, the subheadings for the comprehensive plan, you start there and work your way down. This is intended to help when interested parties are developing a pro forma or a concept plan, or they're interested in a purchase right for a property. They'll be aware of the things and conditions, the benefits, the conditions, sort of the restrictions that occur with that before they go into it, and then find out later that they've spent too much money on land that they can't develop the way they want. Just trying to make things more transparent. The chart also references terms like project. This is something that we've seen everyone struggle with. This is important. We don't necessarily expect a project within a larger mixed use area to have 3 uses. What we expect is an understanding that when we're looking at the larger mixed use area of any mixed use designation, to provide or preserve opportunities to address the larger vision. Generally, you know, the mixed use text says you need to provide a bubble plan or a concept plan with any mixed use project that's still there in the new, that's in the old one, it's there in the new one. We expect that to demonstrate feasibility and connectivity, and then show us how that individual project works within the large element. Strict adherence isn't required to a mixed use concept plan for another project though. We expect general alignment. We expect them to continue demonstrating the feasibility and how they're aligning with the city's larger vision there. But a development agreement is specific to a project, not to a mixed use area. So we can't have the first one in say, this is what we're going to do, and everyone else is beholden to this concept plan. What we're trying to understand is this is the first one in. Now, how can everything else work with your project to meet their overall vision? There's some looks, so I'm just going to pause there in case there's any questions before I go on.
I like where this is going. So, I mean, having a little bit more clarity and a better holistic vision, I think is going to be something that's going to help the commission, council, staff, you know, anybody submitting a project as well. So that's just, so far, I'm interested to see where the word holistic goes in all of this. So far, so good.
Thank you.
15 minutes down. We only got 2 hours and 45 minutes to go. So.
So moving on, this is an example of some of the new graphics in the appendix. The left side is the older adopted graphic. This still exists in the text of the base plan. The right side are completely different text and different annotation style and color to illustrate other principles that align with the principles in the text. And these are cross-referenced. So we're not just trying now to show, here's 5 words and tell us what we're thinking. We're referencing examples and pictures, sketches, but then also photos. So here's some examples of photos and aerials. Again, annotation is the style sort of been consistent with the previous ones, but these are real locations, real photos, and trying to better indicate sort of what we're looking for when we talk about these principles in the text of the comprehensive plan mixed use section. And again, these appendix items will all be cross-referenced in the text of the mixed use areas. We didn't want to fill it up with graphics in case people have a handle on that, but you will be able to quickly see what these are. So briefly, the staff report included a number of additional recommendations. Most of those were, two of those were from staff after fresh eyes. The other 2 were as a result of public comment that we received after submitting or before we submitted the staff report. Strike through and underline, I assume you're all familiar with that, but strike through is removal and underline is additions. So the first two here were staff changes. This first one isn't actually in the mixed use section. It's page C, right at the beginning of the comprehensive plan itself. All it does is strike Sterling codifiers, which is our previous code hosting service. And we're providing a general description there instead in case we switch again. Currently, we're using Unicode. The second one there, revised graphic, I had that on a previous slide. We adjusted, I'll just go back to it. I adjusted some of the terminology here to better align with text that we submitted with you. We had some good comments on this as well after we submitted the application. These next two were the result of some public comments we received from a customer. These made sense, so I'm recommending this forward. The first one, under integration of uses in the new text is, and this, we just sort of talked about this, is to remove development and instead reference projects. So a project within a mixed use designation, not a development. So again, just trying to make the terminology consistent. The second one is under mixed use neighborhood. And keep in mind, mixed use neighborhood, all those examples in that one also apply to mixed use community and mixed use regional. This first one here is to say that we still, single family homes are perfectly appropriate in these designations. We still have requirements for density. We're trying to hit a density that would then require other projects or other unit types to still achieve that density. You're not going to hit 8 dwelling units per acre or 6 with just single family homes. But you could do single family homes as one product type and then have some other product types that sort of transition you into the adopted residential density ranges. No issues with that. The second one in there is condominiums. That's not a product type. And we, as a city, don't typically care or we choose not to care. We're not supposed to care whether something is owned or rented. But the emphasis here is just to say, we like those two.
On the first, where we've switched from development to projects, will that allow us to, we've had several things come in where we have 2 different developments that come in and we hear them at the same time or we hear them in succession. Will that allow, and it's probably more of a process question, will that allow us to see that as a complete project, or do we still see, or are each of those still their own project as a development?
That's a good question. Commissioner, we expect that projects, whether they occur at the same time or different times, to adhere to an overall vision. Sort of the first one in generally develops a concept plan. If they come at the same time, we generally encourage them and hope that they will work together and achieve that vision together. They will still have a development agreement for each, though. We're not going to tie both projects under different ownerships to the same development agreement.
It has the same ownership?
Well, that's different. I'm not sure on that one.
Okay.
If it's the same ownership, then it could, if it's the same ownership under one development agreement, that's different.
We've just had some stuff come through where it's, you know, there's, it may be two properties, 2 different developments, but we've had some stuff come through that it's 2 different developments, same owner, and each of them structured a little bit differently. So it's not, I mean, we can move on from it. It's just, that was the first thing that kind of popped into my head with kind of redoing how that is worded in there, where will it allow us to do that? I think there's great benefit to it, but at the same time, that might make something so big that it's, you know, somebody's trying to develop a square mile, for instance, you know, there's going to be a lot of people in here talking about that, where it'd be better in, you know, smaller chunks. That's kind of the first thing that came to my mind on that, but I will quit talking and let you go back about it.
Commissioner, I just say one more thing. I don't think this precludes doing it any type of way. All it's saying is we're not going, all this is saying is that we're not going to hold different projects under different ownership under one development agreement. They're going to be their own thing. Now, if you come into a project, if you buy a piece of property within a land that already has a development agreement, that's different. But if you're coming in with a new project and there's not a previous concept plan there, you'll have your own.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
Staff, I have another question there. So when you struck out development and put in projects there, do you see those as just synonyms, or do you see, how does that viewed within staff eyes?
Commissioner
their
President,
lens.
Commissioner Wheeler, those are synonyms. I'm gonna give up there. But yes, to me.
Okay.
However, not to everyone. And that terminology, and this goes throughout all this, which is why we're trying to use the same words consistently. Everyone else interprets things the way they sort of have them in their mind, and some people definitely saw development and projects very differently.
Now, on that same concept about the projects and having there's transitional zones or transitional pieces within a different project. If some of those transitional pieces are already a part of one project, is a new project going to be able to use that for their own transitional pieces into where they would want to go, or is it going to have to stand alone on its own parcels, on its own projects?
Mission President, Commissioner Wheeler, I'm not sure I'm tracking what you mean by transitional.
Okay, so like on the mixed use project that might have, you go from single family homes to maybe townhomes before you get into some commercial spaces on the corner or something like this. That way it just doesn't, there's transitions between those zones. But if you have one project that already has those transitions in for theirs, and a new project comes up and abuts next to it, will they also have to integrate their own transitional pieces of, multifamily maybe into a commercial area? Or will they be able to use the existing in order to have the more commercial space? If that's maybe a little more clear.
Commissioner Wheeler, I don't know if this answers your question or not. The future land use map indicates the intensity of uses that we're looking for. And generally, when we look for a transition of uses, it's something new next to something old. And so when something new comes in, most cases, that's not going to go anywhere. If they provide, we're talking new and old. If something comes in new and there's nothing adjacent to it, they're generally expected to provide landscape buffers because we don't know what's going to happen next door. That's still going to be required per city code unless, the property next door says, we don't think you have to do that. And commission says, we're fine with that. I'll let Caleb chime in if he thinks that's wrong though. Does that help at all?
Yeah, I think it does. My only, this holistic approach, I really do like where it's headed, like Mr. Chair said, but I'm just trying to make sure that it seems like not each project's got to have its own, what do you want to say, its own style there, but they can use it off of the larger holistic plan for that area or the larger, I might be saying this differently. Maybe some of you guys understand what I'm trying to say and pipe in then here too to help out, but I'm just trying to make sure that not every project that comes through that we'll take a look at, there's already transitional pieces in place. Those can also be used for the development that's coming in next to it.
And I throw a little bit in here for context. There's the area that we heard about, the area, kind of a development plan for the area that's out McMillan and Chinden in that area, where that was looked at kind of as a development and not necessarily a project, or maybe the other way around, where is something like that. And I'm thinking more along the lines of like a really large, what we've traditionally called the development, with multi-phases over several years, where and what I've seen in the past is, as those begin to happen, they say things like, well, we're going to use the same, we're going to use the same common area. We're going to use the same pathway structure, things like that. Will that still be allowed to happen in the context of a project, or is that more kind of what they're going for? Probably a great example of that is the subdivision that developed on both sides of McMillan, for instance. So I mean, as we go through this, those are the kind of things that we want to make sure that we're will never happen again in Meridian. But at the same time, kind of open things up so that we can have a more holistic view where if a really large development comes in or something that's going to, take a lot longer to develop than, what is traditional, that all the different pieces stand on their own, but at the same time can be seen as one project.
Mr. Commissioner, I think I understand better now. So this won't have any bearing or impact on any of that. Any of those sorts of conditions there are going to be a development agreement item. The project, as you can see on the screen, is really just talking about the general use. So we don't expect project one to have 3 uses. It can be just commercial, so long as they adhere to a general concept plan that leaves room for the other uses to still occur. Any project that it comes through in those areas by themselves would still have to adhere to all of our code requirements. So open space would still, unless there's something in the DA that commission and council allows per city code, they would still have to meet all of our open space requirements and all the city code elements that they can't just be shared unless there's an agreement provision to allow them to do so. This is just the term project here is just for the mixed use area and applies to the uses you see here.
I know we're getting hung up on a word. In that, I guess, I hate to use the term worry, but in the future, when we go down that road where there's not diversification within a specific project, will that lead the city to having to kind of enforce more rigidly what can go in on a parcel of land where we have, somebody says it's mixed use, but we have, commercial. Okay, it's time, no more commercial in this area. Now we've kind of dictated to ourselves that we can't have more commercial. Do we even have the ability to do that? Or, and I ask that because I think we're trying to, within a project, get that diversification so that we don't end up in that situation.
Mr. Commissioner, so absolutely that is a consideration that's important. If we allow commercial, and we don't meet the vision of the comprehensive plan, then, to some degree, shame on us. First one in the door always has preferential abilities, though. They get to set the alignments of the roads. They get to determine where the services are stopped. They set the baseline for just what the project looks and functions like. The visibility, they may be able to limit what other things happen near them because of the design of the buildings and the view sheds they create. Absolutely first one and gets to modify those things. But that's why we're asking and have always asked for a concept plan for a large mixed use area of a designation to make sure that whoever comes in first isn't precluding other things from happening. It's not to say at the end of the day, there may be very good reasons why those things shouldn't occur. But at the end of the day, the comp plan is a guide. It's not perfect. It will never apply all things to all places, to all people. There's limitations on there. Not that we shouldn't strive for that. There's services, what it's trying to do is very important. But it'll never be perfect.
Can I maybe just piggyback a little bit on that? So in that scenario, I think there are a couple of different options, and just building on what Brian said, not the part about our comp planning being imperfect. It's pretty darn close, but you do have the capability. It is a guide. And if it is commercial, and the last one, we want to be commercial as well, we can change the plan if that's really what we think is in the best interest. So we're not locking ourselves in. Yes, there's another step, but it helps us question that last property owner and developer to say, hey, the community expects and is anticipating a mixed use project. If the last parcel in doesn't have, if we're there and it's not, then let's call a spade and let's change the map to say commercial, not mixed use. So we can do that. We're nimble enough where we can modify it, but we have enough of the visioning document to point folks that are trying to develop in the right direction until Planning and Zoning Commission, City Council says, you know what, that vision's outdated. Let's make it all commercial, or whatever the case may be. So just to piggyback a little bit. I mean, this isn't all things to everyone. It is limited to mixed use, and it's belt and suspenders with the UDC. So some of the buffers, some of the transitions, those things will be looked at case by case to make sure it all works together. So this is our first blush to get the first one in, to really set the stage on what we can expect. It's not locking any of the other properties in, but showing how it's possible for them to comply. But again, it's depending depends on what they bring in the door, and we'll look at that and say, yep, this is what we already have on the books. This is what we expect. How do you fit in or not? Excuse me. But yeah, I think, and Brian touched on this, so I'm not trying to be repetitive, but the UDC and things like that will still come into play. This isn't, it's not, a blueprint that you build from. It's a guide with some pretty solid examples, but you can't just pick up this picture and put it down in Meridian and say, there it is, that's going to work. It's meant to show you, but it's not exactly how we're going to see any project. Looks like really any of these project. Am I supposed to say project or development? I can't remember. In Meridian. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Good. Thank you.
Brian, wait till you get to a amendment that you change a whole sentence.
Were there any other questions on this second one, or should I go on?
In here.
So these next series of revisions here came from Brighton Corporation. We received these too late to really integrate into the staff report. So there are additional recommendations on top of what was in the staff report. At the end of the hearing, I'm going to ask you to include these in your motion if you are comfortable moving this forward on to City Council as additional changes to what staff originally proposed. I'm not going to go through all these. Most of these are simple grammar. I will note they had a number of requests in here. You'll see the asterisk on one of them there. Suggestions to change requires to should. I don't like doing that because I really want people to do some of these things. However, this is a comprehensive plan, and outside of very few examples, should is generally what we use there. So I'm recommending that we support the request for requires to should.
I'll weigh in on that. I prefer requires as well, and then they can file for alternative compliance or something along those lines. If, I think the guidance needs to be more direct when it comes down to it, more succinct, so that there's a little less room. I want to leave room for creativity, but just less room for those that like the minimal approach to things. So,
And sorry, I'm going to chime in again. I don't know if this helps or not, but for all intents and purposes, we will expect / require compliance with this. It's just the words in there. The comp plan, again, it's not a standards document. So the shalls and requires type of language you really shouldn't have in there because we don't have that authority to really require, but we will expect it. And if they don't, then we can make statements like you're not in compliance with the comprehensive plan. So some semantics there, but I want to reassure the commission that we take these as shalls. We just don't have the language read that way because there is some, maybe the flexibility even you're talking about to some degree.
okay.
Commissioner, I would always say, and I would personally love it if required stayed there, but I think we've done a much better job of identifying why these needs exist. In some cases it's health, safety, and welfare, and this really is important. The commensurate levels there, it goes on to say other things. This is important. We have tied it to things. We have better explained why it's important and why there is a need. It's going to be much more difficult for someone to say, I don't want to do this, when we've identified specifically why it really needs to happen there. So it's not going to be easy for someone to come in and just roll over staff and say, I'm not doing this, because we're going to come back and say, well, these are all the reasons we say you need to do this, and it's important to the community.
Okay. Questions on that?
Excuse me. This next one, there's another required there, some other changes. They had a good question on one of these, what was last mile? I actually meant to include a definition and I forgot. So I'm suggesting another definition here for last mile. The reason I'm calling this one out specifically is because it's not actually going to happen in the text where this was made. If you looked at the comments, this is going to be put into the glossary of terms, which is the first appendix in the comprehensive plan. So just want to make sure that's clear.
question on, can you go back one more slide?
This one or one more?
One more. Instead of requires or should have or things along those lines, can we use verbiage that's some more in line with is expected?
Commission President Seal, I think at this point, you guys get to recommend what you feel is useful. I think that gets to the same tone. I wouldn't have heartburn over it.
Just something stronger without saying thou shalt, I mean, I think is expected might fill that, or, something along those lines to where it's understood that these are the things that we're expecting to see or to be followed. And with good reasoning given, I think that would help substantiate that as, this is the path we want to be taken. Any comments on that from all commissioners? Okay. So, we'll go ahead.
Comment on that, Mr. Chair. So for me, should have and is expected are, to me, synonyms on that. One of them, it's just grammar type stuff, and I can see when you're saying you should have, right? You should have this in your toolbox. You should have this in your car, right? It's expected you should have this on your tool belt, kind of things like that. It's to me, they can have the same enforcement from the commission and also from staff on that, in my opinion. The way I read that.
Okay.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chair, once when I had a long conversation with a legislator about the difference between shall and will. And I think probably there is a difference, but I think most people don't appreciate it and they interpret will as shall. Just a thought that if it says will have it, I don't think it's prescriptive. I think it's expected, but maybe just to avoid that kind of confusion, I would support using the verbiage of expected.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
I also agree. I think at this point, it's, again, as a guidance document, it's less about, what is legally binding and what is clear to applicants. And I think for me personally, if, if I tell a kid, hey, you should go do this, or I expect you to go do this, I think obviously the context depends and you're expected to, but I think when it's guidance from something, to me, expectation carries a little bit more weight, and I think it's just a little bit clearer. So I think you're probably right. It probably will, hopefully will make it just slightly easier to set the, I guess, level of expectation rather than, just a step beyond a request, but something a little bit more than that of clear expectation. So I think you're right there.
So we can tell John that we expect him to accept that. Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Commissioners, I just ask when we get to the recommendation, if this is something you want to push forward, a little leeway in how staff interprets that. Well, they'll have this like are expected or should be expected, or any other word you choose. And then consistency for all the different references in here, not just the one, or unless you just mean the one. So this slide here where we were at is the last one of the changes. Other than that, this is my original request. I can stand for questions. I have all the documents if you want to go through them in detail. We have 2 hours.
Oh, go ahead.
So, Brian, I was just looking at the materials for the packet this afternoon. And there was a provision here about, for this agenda item for tonight, a little bit of background and the history of it. And it talks, then it goes on to talk about areas of highlight. And it looks like a couple of areas were highlighted as potential areas that were amended. One of them had to do with maximum building size. And I just, maybe I'm not catching it, but it looks like it's in the mixed use neighborhood and mixed use community section. Can you just point to where that is, what the change is, what the edit is?
Commission President, Commissioner Grace, yes, so the staff report goes into that a little bit more. The original comprehensive plan actually this comprehensive, the adopted 2019 comprehensive plan and the original comprehensive plan before that, not original, the 2010 before that, both had the same language in there that involved building footprints within some of the mixed use designations, and they included restrictions on how big a footprint a building could be. They didn't talk about height, they just talked about the footprint. And it was generally in those two designations specific to grocery stores. The reason I called that out in the staff report was because we've had some previous hearings before planning, zoning, and city council that have been contentious, the projects themselves, but then also that specific language. People felt, and I'm going to try not to refer to a specific project, but people felt that projects and grocery stores of a certain size weren't appropriate, even with some of the bonuses you could have in there. And they were trying to, and this is one of the reasons I don't like the bonuses. They were hard to quantify. No one sort of agreed on how much you should get if you did do those things, because it didn't define that. And generally they were arbitrary in my opinion. And I think they were arbitrary in most of the development professionals, the architects, landscape architects, site planners that reviewed this, because grocery stores are changing. They're getting bigger and smaller both. And also because it didn't really talk about how the building looked or fit within a site, and then it completely ignored height. It was just the footprint size. So this proposed text removes references to footprint requirements for those designations, and instead has some new language in the integration of uses section about design and considering the adjacent uses, building mass, transitions, things of that nature. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I was just looking for more specifically, where is that? Is that strike through language that in here somewhere that I'm?
Yes, let me find it.
And again, I think it's under the mixed use and community under C, and I'm guessing it's the references to the fact that most blocks should be no more than, well, no, that's footprint size. I just wanted to take a look at it. I saw the note in the staff report and I thought, oh, that'd be interesting. Let me look for it, see where I can find that.
Mr. Chair, I think Brian's close, just looking at where he's at, but I'll stall a little bit here. You're in the right two spots. So the neighborhood flavor and the mixed use community both had the footprint language in there. So if you're looking at the underlying strike through, it's not in the general mixed use, it's within those two subcategories. I don't know what page numbers are on, but Brian's got it, I think.
On the strike through and underlined version, and in the staff report of that, it's page, so it's Exhibit B, strike through and underlined changes. Page 11 of that, it says, unless the structure contains a mix of both residential and office or residential and commercial land uses, maximum building size should be limited to 20,000 square foot building footprint. Period. For the development of public school sites, the maximum building size does not apply. And then additionally, there's some bonus language in there where you can get sort of override that. That's pretty generic. For example, if you provide civic or open space, you can go above that.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Commissioners, any other specifics or items we want to discuss on that? Okay. I mean, these are a long road for sure. So appreciate all the hard work on this. I'm happy to see the community involvement. I mean, I've been involved in a few of the committees that help kind of with all of this. So it is, it's a large effort, and I'm glad to see that things are kind of moving in the direction of providing kind of better documentation and a better guidance for how we want things to come through the city. And I'm hoping that that will, help the city to see things holistically, not necessarily just from what's coming in, but also what is being replaced. Not necessarily, well, I guess what we may be losing in some of that as well. So, we are growing really, really fast. So it's, I guess a lot of the public feedback that I've seen is, things are a little bit out of control as far as growth. And so it's good to see that we are taking a more holistic approach, not only in each individual application, but just as they all mix together, or as they all come together for the city. Okay. Anybody else? That I will take a motion. Or actually, do
Mr.
we?
Chairman, so it's the public hearing. So
Okay.
I'll just note for the record, we have no members of the public in chambers. I'll ask Madam Clerk if we have any speakers or anybody on Zoom that has indicated they want to speak.
There is one attendee, but they do not have their hand raised.
It looks we have one person on Zoom. Will, if you are interested in speaking on this matter, if you could hit the raise hand button.
If that is not the case, Mr. Chairman, then you would handle like a typical public hearing, and you can entertain a motion to close the hearing when you're ready to do so.
Okay. Commissioners, if that's okay with you, then I think we can move in that direction.
So moved. I move to close the public hearing.
Okay, it's, do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing for file number H 2023-0057. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Public hearing is closed. Any further comments?
Mr. Chairman, I had a question about the motion, but I'll wait a second in case anyone has any further comments.
It's okay.
So were we instructed to, in any motion we make, to also include the additional recommendations from, I think it was Brighton? Is that what I heard, Brian?
Commissioner Seal, Commissioner Grace, my preference would be comments from Brighton as staff addressed tonight, not necessarily all comments from Brighton, because many of them did not propose a solution or one that staff was comfortable with.
And then, Mr. Chairman, did we ever answer the question of whether we were trying to modify every should to expected, or just in that one instance?
In my mind, and we can obviously discuss this. I think, what I wrote down is to use is or are expected as relevant to replace required or should. I don't know if we want to, and that, to me, just in general, if we're going to move in that direction or make that recommendation, I think that it should probably apply more broadly, just so that, yeah, for consistency. So, when people are reading through a project, an application, those words are going to be more synonymous with other applications that might need to come through as well. That makes sense. I don't know if I said that right, but.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, do we want to give staff any ability to exercise some discretion over when they should maybe make that change?
And that's I mean, to me, that's where I like the terminology as relevant. I mean, to me, I think that gives them, it gives staff a wide scope in order to do that. Because there may be some places where, you know, I don't necessarily want to just focus completely in on the word required or should, because they both fit in different circumstances for different reasons. But I think, you know, I mean, I like the idea of using is expected, are expected, that kind of terminology, and replace as much as we can as far as the, you know, required, shall, should, just kind of remove anything that is more authoritative or really ambiguous. But, you know, I think about it if I, Commissioner Smith touched on this when, you know, when speaking to my younger child, if I say, well, you should, okay, that's pretty easy to ignore. If I say, you will, then, you know, if they're a teenager, you're going to get kickback. But if I say, you know, I really expect you to do this, I think that has weight to it. But at the same time, we're not pointing a finger and saying you're going to do this, by gosh. So I just, to me, I like the weight of it without using the word required.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I can, just to add to that, I mean, I think some discretion of staff, like just even as example of what Brian has on the board here, I don't know that we put either of those. We just strike the are required and it reads fine to me. And it is sort of authoritative without being so. There's no shalls but it just says, this is it, you know? So, and you don't need any of those prepositions to add any weight or take away from it. It's just, it's a statement, and it essentially says you have to do it. I mean, doesn't allow wiggle room. I can't interpret that. So we can, I don't have a problem. It'll take some effort, but we can go and read all of those. And I think those are kind of the three options. We are silent on it. We imply the expectation or the should or the shall, but we don't say any of those words because it just says do this. Or we add the expectation language, or we do want some of the consistency you were just talking about. So we'll look for that as well, but sometimes it may just read better and fit better to not put any of that in there. If you allow us that flexibility, if you want to see, I mean, you could push this out for a month and we can come back and you can read all the shoulds and shalls and expecteds and all that. I think it's pretty minor, but if you want to see that before you send it on to council, we could do that, but
Mr. Chairman, I think probably it's adequate that we have on the record that as a commission, we were thinking these notions of should and require really equate to expected. So if anyone maybe looks up the legislative history on it, they could see that that was where the commission was at. I was going to add something like where reasonable, you know, give staff the ability to do that where reasonably possible. Or where it makes sense or something like that. That way they have some flexibility. And if they don't want to say anything at all, maybe that makes more sense, or it's a stronger way to say it versus where the actual word expected is a better approach. So that's sort of how I was looking at it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
And I tend to, I definitely agree with that. I want to give staff as much flexibility as possible in this. But at this, yeah, at the same time, somebody has to formulate a motion. So I'm just trying to figure that out in my own mind as we walk through this. So, Mr. Smith?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was speak to is I think we've kind of had this discussion. Staff has an idea of what, you know, the change we might like to see, but also has discretion. I think we could just keep it as simple as, you know, the modification to ask staff to use more, you know, use clearer language, where, you know, requirement language is being replaced with, you know, maybe suggestive language or something like that, to that extent, maybe not dictating whether it's, is expected to, or if it's striking the word and just saying, hey, we would like to be a little bit more precise in our language in these areas, and just kind of let them make those changes at their discretion. That way, if they look at it and hey, we can just cut the shoulds and requires out entirely and it works fine. They can do that. Or if, expectation language is in there as well, that's fine as well. So I think that's kind of where my head's at. I don't know. I haven't formulated it into a motion yet, but it's kind of my thoughts at least.
I tend to agree with that. I mean, I like the word expected because I brought it up, but outside of that,
Mr. Commissioner or Commissioner Seal.
Yes.
I don't want to disagree because I agree, but I want to say that, we replace some of the shalls or should, or expect, we replace some of the shalls with should because we were trying to be more consistent. So the direction of the consistency you're looking for is still important as well there in order for me to make sure I'm actually doing what you want. Seems like I'm hearing you want to impart some strength without using shall, but I just want to make sure the consistency isn't going back to should with more shoulds, it's X.
Right. Okay. And that's good feedback because I think myself, I'd like to have a little more weight to it than should. That's just my experience in things where things go a little bit, things get a little cross-wired in there as it would be. Should's very, to me, the word should is something that makes it a little easier to ignore. Like, well, we should, but we don't have to. Where there's just a little more expectation that they will without telling them that they have to. So again, just trying to navigate a vocabulary like I would if I'm talking to my kids, trying to steer them to an end without necessarily having to drag them to it.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
just to clarify, I guess, is staff wanting to be consistent across? I think are we saying like we want to leave it open for in some sections, depending on how it reads, to have should, in other words, maybe as expected? And is staff trying to just use the same throughout? Or are we open to?
So I'll take that one maybe. I mean, what I'm hearing, and I'll get with Brian, and we were just kind of talking. I think, well, look, yes, we want to be consistent. And I think where the comp plan currently says shall, we were proposing in this to put should in most cases. Now we'll look to replace the shoulds with some level of expectation and even using that language as much as we can where appropriate and get rid of the shoulds for the most part. So there shouldn't be, not saying it's not appropriate in some cases, but we'll heighten the level of expectation by using that word where we can. And sometimes that's going to mean amending the sentence structure a little bit. But we'll try not to do that too many times. So it still reads largely the way you've seen it tonight. So consistency, I guess, gets trumped a little bit with when we can use expects or it's expected
Or leave it
more and
alone.
more. Or
I mean,
sometimes we will leave it alone and there's
we said where where it reads. I just think there's some areas that might be where we want to be more, stricter or whatnot, or we want to use more stronger words for certain areas that are maybe non-negotiable in a way, right? Like, or should be stronger than others. So I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with what Caleb had mentioned, where sometimes less is more. So I think given the opportunity to remove, a should or required or shall, and just cut it off, like, here's the information. It's not a negotiation at that point. This is, it's basically written, that is the expectation. So I think people would probably take it more that way without having to say anything else.
Commissioner Steve, not to make this even more complicated, but I'm going to. So because this comprehensive plan text amendment also modifies the other areas of text outside of the mixed use, I just want to make it understood where my head is at understanding right now is we're talking about the mixed use section only. We're not going through an entire comp plan and we're doing all shalls and all expected. So just.
Right, completely understood on that. And that's, I mean, and changes like this will probably soon envelop, other areas of the comp plan. So I think the more work that we do at this point in order to provide that consistency, the better off we're going to be in the long run.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
just a question. Do you routinely run into situations where someone goes, well, it says should? And if you do, that's, maybe that's my own naivety thinking those things don't happen, but does it matter, I guess?
So I'll start that one. I mean, yeah, it is pretty, we don't get caught up on the word should so much, but I think inherent to the nature of the comprehensive plan, the people we work with understand this is a guiding principles document, not a standards document. This isn't the law, it's the guidelines, and they know that. And so they push back or away from that as much as possible. So again, we could potentially put shall in there, but it's a bluff because we can't really enforce that. But we do want the weight of, we want to portray that strength without actually saying that. So to answer your question, yeah, I mean, they don't get caught up on it says should, and I choose not to, you know, they don't do it in a smart aleck way, but yeah, they're like, yeah, we read it. We're good. We don't want to do it. So.
If you think you got it.
I'll give it a shot.
Give it a
I don't
shot.
want to steamroll. I don't want to steamroll if you got some eloquent prose. Okay, so I'll give this a shot, and I'm open to amendments if anyone has any feedback. Mr. Chair, I just read the continuance. After considering all staff testimony, I move to recommend approval to the City Council of file number H-2023-0045 as presented in the staff report for the hearing dated December.
Actually, it's 0057.
0057. I have the wrong number. Apologies. Sorry for file number H-2023-0057 as presented in the staff report for the hearing date of December 7th, 2023, with the modification to include the recommended changes in response to the comments from Brighton presented by staff tonight, except to replace the use of the word should with more precise and instructive language consistently throughout the mixed use text where staff deems appropriate.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any discussion?
I just want to make sure I understand so to replace it with more precise.
Your microphone.
Sorry, to replace it with more concise and did you say instructive language?
Yeah, I said precise and instructive. So whether that is using specifically expectation language or using a different term that fits better, just asking staff to something that is more clear.
Okay, with that explanation, I understand now.
All right.
Good to me.
It's been moved and seconded to approve file number H-2023-0057 for the 2023 mixed use comprehensive plan text amendment mixed use. Ooh, with the aforementioned modifications. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion passes. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Go right ahead.
Like to make a motion, we adjourn?
Do you have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We are adjourned.